Hi, this is Savannah,
And this is Brian from the Dorky Diva Show,
and you're listening to Starboars.
the best place for below average Star Wars.
Welcome to Starboars, the best place for below average Star Wars.
Hello there, and welcome to the Star Wars Show, the best place for below average Star Wars. I'm the Jolly Jedi Pete, and we're here with a very special episode. It is the year 2021, it is the 25th anniversary of Shadows of the Empire, which was a multimedia project in 1996 created by Lucasfilm to boost interest in the franchise ahead of the theatrical release of the original trilogy special editions coming in 1997. I myself didn't really experience Shadows of the Empire when it came out, and I haven't really experienced it much since either, apart from knowing who a couple of characters are and owning a couple of action figures throughout the past 20 years. So, this year, I've seen some awesome articles on JediNews.com all about the 25th anniversary of Shadows of the Empire, and I thought, I need to speak to these guys, I need to educate myself, find out what's so awesome about Shadows of the Empire, and why I'm educating myself. Why not get this story out to all you listeners out there? So I've recruited two people. First, Steve from Jedi News. Steve, how are you doing?
How you doing, Pete? I'm well, mate. I'm well, thank you. Thank you for inviting us. It was very kind of you to do that, and I'm really excited about doing this with you this evening.
No problem at all. Thank you very much for coming on. I can't wait to sort of deep dive into Shadows of the Empire and
Awesome.
what the story's about and what it was like living that when it was coming out.
Yeah, it was quite an epic time because obviously we'd gone through the dark times and what have you, and Timothy Zahn popped up with an unbelievable novel in '91. So, yeah, the juices were flowing, and Shadows came out of the blue a bit, and it blew us away. And we thought we couldn't go without celebrating it on Jedi News. It was really important to myself and especially Mark and James because of the experiences that we'd had through them personally. But I think we've got a bit to go before we start discussing that properly.
And we are also joined by Mark from Jedi News. Mark, how are you?
Hi, Pete. I'm good, thank you. Can't wait to talk about this because this had a massive impact on kind of not just my Star Wars experience, but my gaming experience as well.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. So, it's quite strange. In this year we're living in 2021, we've seen sort of the rise of the High Republic, the current Lucasfilm publishing initiative, where it's sort of books, comics, young reader books, young reader comics, and we're getting this sort of narrative tale told across many different forms of media. And it's actually all been done before with actually more different types of media with Shadows of the Empire 25 years ago. Obviously, Shadows of the Empire, it was a novel. We also got a video game. We got a comic book series. We got a soundtrack, and we got action figures. So sort of quite a broad range of media and content and product for the Star Wars fan to grab at there. I'll start with yourself, Steve. Sort of, where were you when you first heard rumblings of this Shadows of the Empire coming out?
Yeah, well, it was earlier that year. Basically, it was the early '96 time. It was the year I got married. So we just bought a house together. So all of a sudden we could start buying things on credit and things like this, and put it against the house and buy it really cheap. Basically, the starting of the rumbling around was the Shadows of the Empire being released for the release of the N64, which is from Nintendo, which is the state of the art 3D gaming system. And basically, it it got to just on around about release date, and I talked my good wife into accompanying me to Comet in Wolverhampton, and to help sign on the dotted line to actually say that we take out the interest-free loan to purchase this N64. And yeah, it was from there that sort of the book obviously was on the market as well at the same time. So they both came together quite quickly, and it was just absolutely mind blowing. It was just something that we'd had gone through such a dark period with Star Wars for such a long time, and then we'd had the ray of light from Timothy Zahn, as I've already touched on, and then we went into this multimedia, and all of a sudden there was just everything thrown at you, and we got the Power of the Force 2 figures that came out in '95, so it was building up and building up to this without really fans knowing about it.
Yeah, obviously, you think if this was happening now, there would have been sort of a trailer release, there would have been a press release probably 2 years before and saying it was in production. Social media, we get sort of information 24/7, where you go back to the 90s where you don't have social media. The internet's probably in its very early infancy, where it's not in everyone's homes, it's only in certain homes probably at that point. So it's sort of almost strange to think that the first time you experience a product is when you see it on the shelf, but that's probably how things were back then.
Very much so. Yeah, so it was a completely different experience then, because obviously, so I remember walking through the store. It's a story I tell on a regular basis about Tim Zahn's novel. Is I was walking through W.H. Smith's. I didn't even know the novel was coming out. It was the day of release. I didn't even know it was coming out, and I saw it on the shelf. So I thought, I'll pick it up. It was the right price range. It was just after payday, and I bought it, and all of a sudden my love was rekindled. And with that through that period, because the internet was really, as you say, in its proper infancy, there was no real press releases. So today we get all the razzle dazzle with everything, and everything's just plastered everywhere, and there's that many ways of communicating these things out to people. But back then it was very difficult. It was splash covers inside of previously released novels and things like that, or when the paperback release would come out, there'd be a slip page at the back saying it's coming soon, Shadows of the Empire sort of thing. And then obviously with the advent of the N64, that was where the real marketing tool came out, because obviously that's where the big money was seen, because obviously the partnership with Nintendo.
Yeah, and I know obviously the N64 came out that year, and I think this title came out like 5 months into the N64's reign, sort of as a major title to sort of get people buying the console, I believe.
Yeah, the other ones was things like GoldenEye. What was the other one, Mark? Come on. Zelda, the Ocarina of Time.
Oh.
So there was some absolutely amazing games out at that time. GoldenEye is still probably one of the best video games I've ever played in my lifetime.
Yeah.
It's iconic. You've got to be of a certain age and have gamed at a certain level. I fell out of love completely with gaming in recent years. I have a PS4 that barely gets switched on, but I'm still so tempted to revisit and go to somewhere like CEX or a retro gaming shop and actually pick up an N64 just to play Shadows and GoldenEye all over again, because that's the type of gaming that I enjoy.
And Mark, was that the same for you? Was it sort of, you found the product on the shelf and that was your first introduction to Shadows of the Empire?
Yeah, I mean, it's so weird talking about it now, because back in the 90s, like you say, there wasn't the social media to build up a buzz, and it was, back then, if you wanted to play a demo of a game, you couldn't just download it off the internet with your dial-up connection, because it would have probably taken you a week to get the demo. But we had gamer magazines that came with discs that had the demos contained on them. And it was on one of these where Shadows of the Empire, there was the demo level of the Battle of Hoth, which for the time was absolutely mind-blowing. I mean, most games before that had either been kind of 2D platform games or kind of predetermined journeys where you could kind of move left or right, where this was far more open. You had control of a snowspeeder, and it just boggled the mind. And obviously we were at a time as well where we were so used to replaying levels again, and again. And it just became so like, wow, look where we've come with technology. And that's how I found it.
Yeah, obviously, it was a story-based game split into 4 parts, I believe. So I think the first level is, or first part of the story is sort of Dash Rendor being sort of drawn into the Battle of Hoth.
Yeah.
What was your first thought sort of playing the beginning of the game and how the graphics and the gameplay was so different from what was around at the time?
Well, like I said, it was just the fact that it was open. I mean, it's like I said, the closest I think we've probably got was Rebel Assault 2 before then, which, like I said, everything was kind of predetermined. You could kind of do certain actions with it, where you're in, one of the most iconic scenes of the original trilogy, being able to, immerse yourself in the cockpit and do just about anything, which, although sounded brilliant, the amount of times I'm sure most of us we're going around these ATATs trying to get our harpoon guns working and losing the ability to do it correctly was shocking. But it was just such a difference from anything that had come before, because, like I said, it was so predetermined where you could go, and this was something vastly different. The graphics, which I'm sure if I looked at now, would probably look far more pixelated, but looked very close to the film, compared to anything we'd played before, and it just it blew everybody's mind, and I suppose that's the biggest difference as well, where we have so much choice now. There's however many games, books, comics released, monthly, sometimes even weekly. Back then, you'd get a really good game release once, maybe twice a year, and so it was something that was really talked about by everybody when you went into school. um and I mean, I was 10 when it came out, so it was the playground demo that everybody was playing, going, have you played this? Have you been able to get all the ATATs down and everything? It just sparked a real buzz that you don't really get now because there's too much choice.
Yeah. How much did so Shadows of the Empire, the video game, it takes place in between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. Obviously, the first part of the game takes place actually during Empire Strikes Back. Did you know that going into the game, or was that something you found out sort of as you were playing it?
Well, like Steve says, there was not a lot of buzz really about what on earth this was. So all we had was the demo, and that was about it. Like, nobody really knew what it was about. Obviously, at that age, I suppose my inquisitive mind wasn't probably what it is now, and so it was literally just, this is a really, really cool level. Shadows of the Empire, haven't got a clue what it's about, but it sounds cool. And that was pretty much it until I walked into Nostalgia Comics in Birmingham, and I actually saw there was a comic with the same name and thought, well, that looks interesting. And not really joining the dots because the full game hadn't actually come out at that point. And so it was kind of, you unravelled it piece by piece, and then I ended up going into what John Menzies at the time, and finding the book, and slowly these pieces came together. I mean, you mentioned the High Republic, which, incredible series, but now I know, and I think most of us do, what are the next books in the series, how they're all connected and everything. But back then, with the internet in such infancy and not really knowing where to go as a 10-year-old, it was just, you just got these bits when you saw them.
I also think that LucasArts at the time were really punching their weight in the, how can you put it, in the gaming arena, because they'd already got things out like Dark Empire. They'd already got things out. You just mentioned it, Rebel Assault and things like that. So LucasArts were already punching at a good weight at that time. They'd also got things out like Grim Fandango, and there was a game that I was talking to John Knowles about not so long back, and I can't remember the name of it now. It's Full Throttle. And these were games that were coming out about that time, but Shadows was the next step. It was actually going to take you, instead of being a game where you were sort of like on the edge of the experience, it was actually going to take you inside the galaxy. It was actually going to put you as a third person within the galaxy, and I think that was the game changer. You were actually in the cockpit of the Outrider. You were actually in the cockpit of that snowspeeder.
Yeah.
And I think that was also what grasped people as well, was that advancement in technology, what the N64 gave us, and the PC, because obviously what you can remember is the home PC market was very, very limited at the time. You were lucky if you had somebody with a home PC. Gaming PCs and that are everybody's rage. My godson, he's got a huge gaming PC under his desk at home with a 28-inch monitor and all this sort of thing. He's heavily into his gaming. He plays Fortnite all the time and what have you. But that sort of gaming wasn't existing. You had to use a business laptop. So to be fair, I got a copy of Shadows of the Empire. The business that I was working for at the time has now gone bump, so it's not a problem to tell you. But I've actually got a copy on my works laptop to play at home of a night time because I hadn't got a laptop of my own if I couldn't get to my N64.
That's fantastic. It's crazy how, like, you know, if the game came out now, it would probably be available on mobile and, you know, on handheld.
Yeah.
You know, back then it was like, you know, like it's on the PC, on a laptop, or on console, and that's it. So yeah, so the game's split into 4 levels. So obviously the first level is Dash Rendor drawn at the Battle of Hoth. Second one is Dash confronts IG-88, the bounty hunter, who leads into Boba Fett. Obviously we are hunting for Han Solo here, which it's crazy how, you know, 25 years ago we're doing the story sort of how to save Han Solo from Jabba the Hutt. And then right now we've got a Marvel comic series telling the exact same story. Well, not the exact same story, but it's the exact same plot line type of thing. Like, how do we get Han Solo in this war of the bounty hunters that's happening?
Yeah, so that's something I've spoken to Ethan Sachs about, and Paolo Vianelli, because we've interviewed both of them with Jedi News recently. And yeah, we said, like, you know, sort of the parallels with Shadows, but, you know, surprisingly, someone like Ethan wasn't a fan of Shadows. It didn't fall into his remit because of where he was in life. But somebody like Denton Tipton, who's, you know, sort of famous for working on IDW and has now gone independent with Magma Comics, he's a huge fan and really has been affected by it, and Nick Brokenshire as well. So you can see there's people in the industry who are working on this type of thing who have got time and energy invested in Shadows, and that was one of the reasons why we wanted to celebrate it, because we actually realised how iconic it was at the time.
The level after sort of the IG-88 who leads you to Boba Fett is Dash Rendor ends up saving Luke Skywalker's life by fighting a gang of swoop bikers in Mos Eisley on Tatooine, and then also helps Luke recover plans for the second Death Star. So again, not only tying into sort of that Han Solo storyline which we're getting now, but then this level here ties directly into Return of the Jedi. Do you remember that being quite a sort of a wow moment when that happened?
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a few in Shadows. I mean, obviously the biggest. I mean, within the game, that was huge. Going actually, Luke, particularly at the point where he is. I mean, if you think when we see him at Empire, obviously we have the big reveal, and you think, oh my gosh, he's got all that to deal with. And then within the 6 months between that and Jedi, you know, he's this Jedi who, you know, is incredible. His powers have really come along. And yet it was shocking to realise that actually he needs somebody to protect him. He's not as all-powerful as he seems to be in Return of the Jedi. And the fact that you're playing the character who's going around saving Luke Skywalker was just kind of wow. Because, I mean, obviously at that time, you know, there was no prequels. It was literally, you know, Luke was the hero. And so to be able to go, yeah, I'm saving Luke Skywalker was just really cool. And then obviously after having the Snowspeeder battle, which was so iconic, the next level after that's actually going through an asteroid field, very much in the same vein as Empire Strikes Back. And then to be on the swoop bikes has got the element of Return of the Jedi, but obviously set on Tatooine, which, again, another iconic location. And it just, all the levels had something that really harkened back to the movies. So there was something a little bit new, but also something so familiar of what we really wanted in a game, done in an interesting new way. And then the revelations that came through the game, like you say, you know, you're the one saving Luke Skywalker, your contribution to, you know, what's going to happen in the film. Everything just came together really, really well.
Yeah, I also think that. Sorry, I also think that when it's okay. I also think that when you look at the storyline as well, especially when you look at the book, because the book obviously is a different story, although set in the same timeline, that you see parts in the game. You know, so Luke is part of the task force of the Bothans that actually gets the codes or gets the plans for the Death Star, but that all goes wrong, and he never knows that what he's helped retrieve are the plans to the Death Star. And that is the process of when all the Bothans get killed as well. So you're playing a prominent part with Luke Skywalker to make who as part of a major event of what's going to come. But also as well, he doesn't actually realise what he's actually done as well. So although it touches on it in the game and actually heavily touches on the book, it's quite a poignant part as well. That is.
Did it change how you? So after playing this game and reading the book and seeing how it interacts with Return of the Jedi, then rewatching Return of the Jedi, did it change how you watch that movie? Perhaps.
Oh, definitely, yeah. I think the relationship between Lando, Leia, Luke, because so Lando's still not trusted throughout the book. He's still a bit on the outside of the group because he's deemed to have betrayed them. So I think that's quite a heavy influence. Boba Fett comes out of it still as the badass, as he still does, and and still rightly does as well. Because I still think for me he's my favourite bounty hunter, and so I'm willing to fight anybody in the street over that one because you're never going to change my mind. But so you also see a more vulnerable side to Vader because obviously he's having his buttons pressed by Shizor. So he's being challenged by him, and you start to see the rift in between that he's trying to put in between him and the Emperor. So there is so much there that it can influence the way you look at Return of the Jedi for definite. I think it will. I think what we're getting now within War of the Bounty Hunters, I think that will have a similar, very, very similar impact to what we've seen through Shadows. I think the guys have done a brilliant job so far bringing it all together at Marvel. But I also think that so again, Shadows is still worthy of it. Although it's not deemed as canon anymore, as a legend, it's worth anybody's money still.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at as well, Shizor as just the whole fact that when you originally watch the films, it's it's the Emperor and Vader doing their thing, and then suddenly there's this whole other character. The fact that the Empire is aligned with Black Sun through Shizor, and that there's this whole third party that's actually vying for Vader's attention from the Emperor, which when you say it now and what we know about how the Emperor operates and how the Sith operate, seems like the most obvious thing in the world. But obviously back then it was literally the Emperor and Vader to us. And so to bring in this third character was like mind-blowing and really showing kind of the machinations of how the Emperor works, of playing people off each other and all those sort of things. So when you see Jedi, even Empire, and knowing that actually there is someone, here trying to influence, or what Vader's had to go through to try and get to the point where he is. And it kind of makes sense of why he wants Luke with him, not just because he's his son, but because he needs someone he can trust, where he's always fighting against, Shizor or the Emperor throwing other things at him that you just never comprehended when watching the films in the first place.
Yeah, obviously that's like, in the game you sort of got two main storylines going on. You've got sort of Dash Rendar's adventure to sort of help the rebel heroes, and then you've got sort of Vader battling to sort of keep his place by the side of the Emperor. When obviously you experienced this story for the first time, did it humanize Vader even more for you?
Definitely. Yeah, I can agree with that totally. It put a vulnerability to him. You'd never seen that on screen or really in the books, because obviously the books that are now cast as legends and what have you didn't really fill the gaps in between the films. They were all set after Jedi. So what you got was all of a sudden you got these bits being filled in. So they spoke of Vader. You might have had a Force ghost of Vader or something along those lines, but you wouldn't have actually known about Vader himself. Obviously, the prequels were yet to happen, so we got no idea what Anakin Skywalker really was. So obviously, you got something that was actually going to look at pushing his buttons and looking at how he worked a bit, and obviously the challenge of Shizor and sort of his lust to find his son. And to bring his son to his side and all these sort of things after he's learned about Luke for the first time. Obviously, he's still oblivious to Leia being his daughter. So yeah, I think I think it actually put a really good side to Vader that we'd not seen previously.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And it's like you say, I mean, up to that point, nothing had touched. I think apart from I think Splinter of the Mind's Eye, which was obviously written in '78, none of the books were allowed to go between episode 4 and episode 6. I remember the buzz when I think it was the one to say off the top of my head, it was Timothy Zahn's Allegiance, which broke the gap between A New Hope and Empire. But to have something fill that in, we see, these days there's a book released there's books released all the time that fill in all these different gaps. But back then, even without Shadows being the massive project it was, each book release was huge because you got one, maybe two a year if you were really lucky. You had book covers designed by Drew Struzan, which obviously Shadows has, but these books were designed by someone who'd done and still does, worldwide, movie posters. And they were really something to celebrate. So to have something that focused on Vader and Vader while he's going through this was absolutely huge, and to see into his mind. And, even looking at the soundtrack, where you have Vader's theme that he's done at a slower tempo to show kind of this thought process that he's having to go through of what the Emperor's putting him through, of revealing who he is to his son. Or the whole experience just added to this question of who is Vader, and you got some answers, and you then got even more questions of how deep is this, how strong is his loyalty to the Emperor, and it was shocking at the time in a very good way.
Yeah, it sounds to me, obviously I've not experienced the story, but like this content here with Vader probably adds even more sort of clout to his redemption, that he is going through this before Return of the Jedi.
Yeah,
Steve,
yeah, I'd definitely say that as well, because obviously, I still think that now, even with the current ending that we have to the whole Skywalker saga, I still think that Shadows, as it stands with a few minor edits, could actually still stand in current canon.
Yes, I agree with that.
Because of the way it flows, and it is very much, this is going to be a bad phrase that I don't like using, but it is Star Wars. And I don't mean to say that episodes 7, 8, and 9 aren't, but even with the finale that we have, that I know a lot of people conjecture out there over it, and I'm not 100% fan of it, but I'm not against it as a lot of people are. I do think that Shadows in its context could still stand in the storyline and never need to be touched.
Yeah, absolutely. There's nothing that I can think of off the top of my head that gets contradicted at all. And I suppose there's always been a part of me that was really hoping Shadows would be made current canon because of the influence it had on so many of us, at that particular time.
If they were to redo, say they were going to tweak the story and bring it into canon, but they're only going to do it in one medium, what would you rather have? A book, a novel, or a video game?
Ooh, that's a toughie.
Sorry, I love the tough one.
I loved every single part of it. So to pick one way of redoing it, I've got to be honest, I think it would be the video game. The reason I say that is because of the tech now of what they could produce. But what I'd want is I want a game along the very, very similar lines. This was part of what we discussed with John Knowles when he kindly agreed to be interviewed for the series. And John said he wouldn't necessarily want to revisit on a different console, really, because obviously, whether you'd spoil what's gone before. But I think if they could update Shadows, it's been mooted before that it might actually happen, but I can categorically say that I don't believe it ever will. But I think a revisit of the video game, I think, would be the way I'd like to see it go forward if that would ever happen. Although that is really hypothetical.
See, I don't know. I think for me it would be the book because how computer gaming has changed. I mean, like I said, you don't get demo discs anymore. everyone's playing such a variety. It's very rare there is a buzz about a single game from everybody. I don't know whether you'd get that same feeling that we had back when the first game was kind of coming out on those demo discs, and then it finally got released and everyone was playing it. I don't think you'd get that. So I think for me it would be the book.
Awesome. So, obviously, new characters introduced across the Shadows of the Empire story, and that is Dash Rendar and his. Is it a Corellian freighter, the Outrider?
Yeah, the YT 2400.
Yeah.
So you could say that ship is very much similar to the Millennium Falcon, and I have seen sort of online discourse about how similar Dash Rendar is to Han Solo.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an old adage. Yeah, he was meant to be a lot of people didn't like Shadows. I wouldn't say a lot. There was some people out there who didn't like it, and it was because obviously Han Solo was off limits. Han Solo was encased in carbonite, so Steve Perry and John Knowles and John Wagner had got nowhere to take Han Solo apart from A to B. He got to go from Cloud City to Tatooine. That was his journey. That's all could happen to him. But they wanted a cavalier, smuggler type character to play off against the crew that we knew. So obviously Lando, Luke, Chewie, the droids, and Leia. So obviously there was that, and that really worked really well for some people. But other people thought he was a cheap Han Solo knockoff because he got a Corellian freighter. For me, he was very similar to Han Solo. But he'd also gone back to the Han Solo from the Brian Daley books, where Brian Daley had actually written in two characters. I can't remember the first ones, and I am not swearing when I say this, but the second droid that was with Han Solo was called Bollocks.
The other one was Blue.
Blue. I couldn't remember. There was two droids. I knew that I couldn't remember the other one off the top of my head, and it's BOLLUX, not as in not as in the other way. And basically, the reliance on droids, and you got Lebo. So in a way, you'd actually got you had got a reboot of Han Solo, but it harked back to the early or late 70s, early 80s version by Brian Daley, where he was reliant on a robot, but no Chewbacca type co-rider. So when you've got L3 in Solo next to Lando Calrissian, you've got your dynamic there, which possibly may have had an influence on the writing of Solo.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Lebo was actually voiced by Tom Kane, who obviously would go on to do a fair bit in Star Wars animation. But it's always surprised me with Dash Rendar because you can see the similarities with Han Solo, and yet they're just, from some people, wasn't the love for him. I mean, I'll probably say 10 years after, a book called Shadow Games came out, which was set before Shadows of the Empire, which had Dash as one of the main characters, working as like a bodyguard. And I loved it because it was going back to revisit that character, and yet it wasn't very well received, mainly because people were just like, no, this is just another, we don't want a Han Solo knockoff, we want a Han Solo. And I kind of think, you know what, as obviously Han Solo is unique, but there should be the type of him, like Steve says, back and how he was in A New Hope. There should be, lots of people like him in the galaxy, but it's actually Han was unique because he turned it round. He saw the good in the rebellion and fighting, for the right cause.
Yeah, he's the scoundrel with the heart, isn't he?
Yeah.
Definitely.
So the last part of the game, after you save Luke Skywalker and recover the plans for the second Death Star, is we end up on Coruscant. So this is before the prequels. And Dash, Luke, and Lando Calrissian travel to Coruscant to rescue Princess Leia. How was that sort of experience in the capital, and sort of was that common knowledge that Coruscant was the capital of the Republic and capital of the Empire?
Yeah, it was preferably known as Imperial City at the time. So it wasn't actually known as Coruscant at any real time. It was always referred to as Imperial City.
I think it
Uh,
was been named, hadn't it, by
yeah,
Khan, but nobody was really using it
that's
as
right.
a given name.
Yeah, and sort of like to actually get a description in the book of what you were going to experience because of obviously the sky hooks. So it wasn't just like the landscape; it was the skyscape as well. And that went in depth. But obviously, then you started to understand that because you're having to use fly through it, etc., through the end of the game, and you got the 3D perspective of it all, and then obviously you got the sewers and all those sort of things, and yeah, so it was fascinating to actually see the Emperor's home planet because that's how it was. We didn't know about Naboo. We didn't know about his lineage from Naboo at the time. So obviously so we always thought that the Emperor came from Coruscant. We hadn't got any background on him. It was very good to hear about all the underworld and things like that. And this is before Star Wars 1313 was rumoured, and we knew all about that. And so obviously Attack of the Clones and Phantom. The Attack of the Clones actually wasn't it that actually took us under those levels for the first time, and we've seen subsequently go through that with the Clone Wars quite heavily. So yeah, it was a real eye opener to what was there and what was in Imperial City or Imperial Centre. Sorry.
Out of the 4 levels, which level was each of yours favourite to play?
I know what his answer is. It's got to be the snow. It's got to be the
It
AT-ATs for
has
you, Mark. It's going to be. I know it. I know it. Before
because
you've even said it.
well, you got to remember. It was that popular a level that it then subsequently appeared on another incredible game for the N64, which was Rogue Squadron.
Yeah, that's right.
Complete, nothing really different about it whatsoever. They just put it on the game, and it was like, you think these days people will kick up a right fuss about a level just being copied over to another game, and yet none of us have complained at all. I think that level is so monumental for the gaming industry at that point. I think it's got to be that one followed very very closely by the swoop bike level.
Yeah, I think for me, I think going not actually. I think the formative levels for me were the best for me. I think going through the base at Hoth. So when you've actually got the floors all cracking and it's under attack before you actually get out into the snow speed and onto the AT-AT, I think that really captured my imagination because although you're running, there's a big burly bloke with a bit of like Judge Dredd type armor across his shoulders, running around in a sleeveless shirt with quite big muscles. Does seem a bit ludicrous where Han is done up with a big Parker coat sort of type thing. When he's in there and scarves and everything, so he does make a decry of that. But I just felt that level took you inside the base and just immersed you straight away in it. And I think for me that's what switched me onto it. I think that's probably where my not preference, but my heart would lie. It's just that opening few sub levels as such.
And what was each of your favourite piece of storytelling from the game?
Oh gosh, that's a tricky. So for me, I think that's where the swoop bikes would come in. I loved being. I love Tatooine as kind of like the idea about people trying to carve out their life, desperately trying to get moisture and everything, and to have Luke there and to be the biggest thing I think was you had obviously we saw the speeder bikes in Return of the Jedi, but to have these swoop bikes which looked insanely cool that you got to go around with, which kind of coincides with the toy releases because I had the Micro Machine swoop bikes. And looking at these things going, these look amazing. And to be actually go at those speeds in the game and just realise that it just added a lot more depth in terms of like the technology of the galaxy that you've got, the Empire using the, high-tech speeder bikes, and then everyone else has got these kind of kit bash things that kind of go along, but, aren't quite as efficient as they should be. and the fact you're having to save Luke as well at the same time for the game, that would be the pinnacle for me.
Yeah, I think I've got to quite agree there. I think the iconic look of those swoop bikes is a classic low slung Harley Davidson. It's like it's coming out of Orange County choppers over in the US, and with the big handlebars high up and sort of the low slung seat, sort of slightly laid back position that those riders were meant to be in on those bikes. Yeah, for me, yeah, it's got to be that as well because it just put you again. It immersed you into Tatooine, and obviously that's where the whole of the trilogy really starts, where you actually get to know about Luke and what have you, going through Beggar's Canyon and all that in A New Hope, and it takes you back to that visceral sort of environment that is dangerous. Obviously puts you in immediate danger, and it was pretty difficult as well.
Yeah.
Did you guys both play N64 versions, or did you play the PC version as well?
I just played. Well, I played the demo of the snow speeder level on the PC, but then it was N64 because, gosh, what was it? Packard Bell struggled playing games, so it was N64 cartridge all the way once it came out.
Yeah, it was N64 for me, and obviously my works laptop used to get the odd outing now and again. The one time my brother-in-law did actually play a game on my works laptop, and he played it that much. It wasn't Shadows, but he actually destroyed the CPU in it. So I had to have it repaired and explain it to my gaffers because it had overheated because he was playing it that much. So it'd definitely be N64 all the way.
What was your excuse for it overheating?
I've just said it was faulty tech. Luckily, I was in that trade, so I actually managed to get just a warranty call put on it. Fudge the paperwork as you do.
The things we do for Star Wars.
I know.
I'm just reading there. So one of the key differences, obviously, I know the PC version came later, was that in the N64 version, it utilizes artwork with text at the bottom of the screen instead of cutscenes, where the PC version has full motion cinematic cutscenes with sound effects and voices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that was a bit different. Obviously, for the first time seeing that type of thing, obviously those sort of things were being pioneered by LucasArts at the time, because the team that they got assembled was phenomenal, and the people that were behind those types of things as well, these cut scenes and all those sort of things, were the Hildebrandt brothers, Greg and Tim, and they were producing artwork, and there was over 100 pieces of art that they produced, obviously for the trading card set for Tops, and some of that artwork was then reiterated and then reinstalled back into the games. So it was quite a mammoth task for their creativity and what have you to actually feed that in to actually get those cutscenes put together.
We've covered the game quite a bit there. So sort of moving on to the novel, sort of, would you mind giving us a brief outline of the story in the novel and how it's different from the game?
I mean, that's perspective, isn't it, Steve? It's the game. You're Dash, and very much taking things from Dash's point of view. The book, I would say, is more overarching, but very much with the focus on Shizor and how he's working against Vader to try and sabotage Vader's efforts to get Luke to the Emperor.
Yep, completely agree. The book is the same story, but from a different perspective, and I think that's why the mediums actually work together. Because again, John Wagner's comic book was the same storyline, it was the same eventualities, and some key events happen simultaneously between all the platforms. But again, it was perspective because that was more from Boba Fett's.
Yeah.
Can you put trials to get Han Solo to Jabba? So again, it was more perspective based. So yeah, going along the lines of Shizor, possibly Luke, but you still it goes along with. I would say that Shizor is one of the key focuses. Vader, but also you've got your rebellion as well. So the rebels, it doesn't actually particularly follow one of them. It actually follows them as a group because they're actually working together.
Yeah. So obviously with Shizo and Black Sun, this will be the first time we were introduced to Black Sun in canon. Is that correct? At the time.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it was huge to know. I mean, the fact that Shizuo was working with the Empire and was third in line really to the hierarchy was just mind blowing. I mean, because with the book, it was the audio book I got first, and hearing that come over with the soundtrack was just like, are you kidding me? It was like you say, it's one of those things that makes you rethink the films, rethink how you see the Empire. And Shizel was it was like nothing we'd ever seen before. We'd had, I think, up to that point, Thrawn and people who seem very imperial esque, and then you have this, you know, leader of a crime syndicate who we'd met Jabba, who, let's be honest, you're never going to forget Jabba. But, you had Shizor, who was reptilian and you just looked at him going, my gosh, this is something very, very new to Star Wars. How he operates is very different. And the fact it's with the Empire rather than, the Empire. I mean, what we knew of the Empire was, Jabba had to be on the outskirts. Han had to be careful, he was a smuggler and everything. But this guy was actually working with the Empire as opposed to against them.
The interesting spin on that as well is when you look at Shizor, he's actually head of Black Sun. Jabba is a puppet to Black Sun, so he's well down the food chain. What you can remember as well is in '97 we had the release of the special editions. So Han meeting Jabba hadn't happened on screen at that point in time either. So really, when you look at the big part of it, Han Solo is real small fry in the lineage of smuggling and all those sort of things. But it also reflects on how insignificant Jabba also is as well. So it just shows that, so Shizor is puppeteering Jabba and using his ownership of Han Solo through Boba Fett to actually get back at Vader. If you see what I mean, it's like, although it's distant, the relationship is distant. So obviously we didn't know that much about Jabba from A New Hope until the following year, because obviously all that that was originally shot with Declan Mulholland was actually reintroduced with the CG version of Jabba and obviously reshot in places. So it actually developed Jabba's place in everything. So you actually realised how insignificant in a way that he actually was.
And so when Shadows of the Empire, you're playing the game, you're reading the book, you're seeing the comic book on shelves. Are you aware at this point that the special editions are coming a year later?
Not really, no. It was still never really put out there. I remember when it was put. I think it was probably the turn of the year. It was the start of '97. I think that really before we started hearing that it was definitely happening. I think it was just rumblings
We're
started
still
happening.
celebrating the release of the re-release of the VHSs at that point.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. It's so strange talking about it now, but obviously Star Wars was quite hard to get hold of on VHS. I mean, I had recorded off the TV of all things, but to get a decent copy with, I think the big selling point was with THX sound, with a decent sound quality, had come out. I mean, I'm probably talking 3 years previously, but the idea of special editions just nothing had been heard of because you didn't have the kind of the social media's been able to spread gossip. You didn't have people looking into things, or even if you did, you weren't really looking for it.
I think also as well, home cinema hadn't really become an advent. I think it was in its properly in its infancy, like the internet at the time. So there was also the push there for obviously things going to widescreen, because obviously widescreen TVs were for people who got a bit of money. Like like sometimes people say 4K TVs at the moment, and Ultra HD and all that sort of stuff. There's always a change in how can you put it, in technology that sort of like pushes us to the next level, and that is one of the drivers. So I do know that obviously through talking to a few people connected to things, the the actual creation of the special editions was to test the water for the technology for the prequel trilogy. So Shadows is also a forerunner for testing the technology is there to actually go and actually put out a special edition. Because obviously they're having to clean up all the footage, sort of take all the original reels out, and sort of some parts of some of the reels were nearly beyond repair, and all these sort of things. So there was a hell of a lot going on in the background. So so it was a bit like a swan. Lucasfilm and LucasArts were just growing across the water, but the legs underneath were just going like Billy-O.
I'm glad you brought up widescreen there. I remember when the special editions came out on VHS, if I remember this correctly, it got released in widescreen and non-widescreen. I think, was it a
Yeah.
silver box for normal and a gold box for widescreen?
I think
That's
it was
right.
the other way around because I had the gold box.
Yes,
So-
it would be the other way around. Yes, so I had the silver box.
So I remember I really wanted. We didn't have widescreen, and I really wanted the color that was widescreen. And my mum was like, "We haven't got widescreen, son. You can't have it." And I was like, "But I don't want this color. I want the other color." And I remember like not understanding what she meant. I was like, "Why can't we get a widescreen?" She was like, "We can't afford a widescreen, son." I was like, why can't we?" But like, yeah, I remember that being like the biggest issue in my life. I think at the time was I wanted the other color box set.
Oh, you say that. I remember my biggest issue was I remember going, come on ITV in widescreen, saying to my dad, "Dad, there are bits of Star Wars here that I've never seen before. It's like they've cut it down." And he was looking at me like going, "Are you going mad?" I was like, "No, Dad, seriously, I'm joking. I'm not joking. There's bits," and we hadn't, really got to grips with widescreen, and I was like, "Dad, I've seen this film this many times. I'm telling you, there are bits I can see Luke walking up the stairs and pulling out our video, recorded videos, and my dad going, 'Oh my goodness me!' I'm like, 'Yes.'"
We at the time, because obviously we got we just got married and all that sort of thing. We were running with a 21-inch 4:3 ratio telly, and I bought the widescreen versions. So you just imagine what size they were on the 4:3 screen. You get laptop screens that are bigger than that.
Yeah.
It's crazy the price of televisions now. You can get like, you can get a pretty big flat screen for a couple £100 now. Where I remember, sort of go to my mum and we need to buy a widescreen telly, and they were like, you were talking, over £500 for these very very fat pieces of kit. So it's crazy how media's changed. I think kids these days don't realize how easy they've got things. I think if I wanted to watch it in widescreen, I'd probably have to go to a friend's house and watch it at their house in widescreen. And how, you would have to record if you didn't have the VHSs, you would have to wait for it to come on television and then set your VHR to record it. And I think these days, it's just you press a button and you've got it. You look at Disney Plus, if you buy a smart telly and you can just click a button and they've got Star Wars in widescreen in the best quality it's ever been in.
Yeah, I think the one thing that people do forget is I saw Star Wars early '78. I was very lucky. I was around at that time. Unlucky in other ways when they get up some mornings and they ate like hell. But in general, so I had to wait probably a couple of years before I saw Star Wars again. You know what I mean? I was 5 when I went. I was looking to see A New Hope, and then I was probably 7 before I saw it again. I was just feeding off the comics, and sort of the scraps of what was available. Sort of on TV programs where they might have featured like a 30-second snippet of something going on.
This really does sound like the medieval times, Steve.
You're sorry.
This really does sound like the medieval times.
Yeah, and so my wife and I have conversations on a regular basis, saying, "Oh, can you remember when we used to have to do that? We used to have the bread delivered to our door and stuff like that. These days you can get what can you get delivered to your door? Well, bloody anything. Yeah, but back then it was like we still got the coal man coming round and stuff like that. It's different times, mate. And a lot of kids they don't understand, as you say, Pete. Everything's on tap for so many people these days. And the experience of Star Wars back in the '70s, and partly through the '90s as well, with no social media and technology, it was still quite antiquated.
jumping back into the novel.
Yeah,
that's
sorry,
the
we've gone right off on a tangent, haven't we? There, sorry.
Well, it was me who brought it up. To be fair, so it's fine. Jumping back into the novel though, so Steve Perry's sort of the author. Obviously, the book's now Legends. Have you sort of read the book? Have you reread the book recently? And sort of how does the story hold up now to how it was then, 25 years ago?
Go on,
Sorry, Steve, you go.
I reread it as revision for doing the Shadows of the Empire, or Shadows at 25, as we called it, for doing the articles, and I reread it, and it holds up perfectly well. I think as a standalone book, I had a bit of, not a debate, but had a few tweets going alongside with Cavan Scott on Twitter the other day, and he turned around and says, as long as it's a good read, it doesn't matter whether it's canon or not. Enjoy the book for what it is. If it's a good story and it holds up, it's worth reading. And that for me says everything. Shadows of the Empire is an absolutely stunning book to read. It's not the longest of novels either. It's not an arduous read. It's fun, and it's so well written. It really is.
Yeah, I actually listened to the audiobook again recently, just because that's how I experienced the novel the first time round. And I agree with Steve. I think it holds up. It's, as Steve said, a bit earlier. It just feels like Star Wars. It doesn't take itself too seriously. There's that humour in, but it's still got that element of Star Wars, of that original trilogy feel that I think sometimes can be a bit lacking in some of the future books, where it just feels right.
I think the one thing that Steve Perry did, which for me really stands out in the book, is the time where Leia and Shizor are left alone, where she's trying to negotiate transport for the rebellion through Shizor's transport arm that the Empire is also using to construct the second Death Star. Now, she goes in and he's got this power to exude pheromones which can win over any female of any species. So it's a bit like an aftershave called the Force, but obviously it works in a slightly different way. And he's changing colour as he exudes this pheromone, and he's actually seducing Leia with these pheromones, and she can't understand why she's feeling this way towards him, but she's got these feelings for Han. And the chapters where Perry deals with those, the writing is phenomenal, and it gives another aspect to Leia and her internal troubles and toils, because she still doesn't know Luke's her brother, but she understands there's a relationship there with Luke, but she doesn't understand whether it's how can you put it, a lustful relationship in the future, or it's actually a platonic, brotherly one, which is what we are, which is what we do get, and it's a confusion that's within her, and the way that is written is some of the best writing we've probably seen in some of the Star Wars legends.
I've heard a rumor that the publishers originally instructed Steve Perry to write that that actually, like, he's successful in seducing Leia, but the author actually refused because he feared a fan backlash on it.
Yeah, that's right. Steve did kick back on it. And I think he did the right thing, actually. I think it was a very, very good choice. Yeah, he did. He commented in the interview that we did with him, and he said that, so I said that was like one of my real standout parts of the book, and he says, he said that could have gone slightly differently. So yes, that is correct. He did actually kick back and say, no, I think it should go this way, and I wholeheartedly back the decision he made. It was a great decision, and I say again, a great piece of writing.
I wonder if, if Shadows of the Empire was coming out now for the first time, and they'd done the successful seducing of Leia storyline, I guarantee that would be something that would cause a Twitter breakdown.
Oh, yes, definitely. Completely agree with that.
Yes. I mean, it's true because obviously, again, you're going back to we don't know much about our, not compared to now of the characters, and you just had to have Leia having somewhat strong-willed, as because it's Leia. She should be. We wanted the Leia that we had from A New Hope, not someone who could just be so easily distracted. So, like you say, I think Twitter would just go crazy over it. To be honest, it would be, the impact would be shocking.
Come on, it doesn't take much for Twitter to melt down, does it? Anyway, over Star Wars.
Yeah.
No,
All you got to do is somebody do something just so minor that somebody doesn't like, and there's a crest of a wave that's coming through that's going to take out the whole of fandom one day. It's
yeah,
it's one
you
of
don't
those.
It's volatile, do you?
It's volatile at best.
Yeah.
Is it right that Steve Perry's expressed his support in adapting the story as an animated film?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that would be. I'm surprised it hasn't been done before, because it seems such an obvious one to do, particularly as it's held in such high regard by so many people.
Yeah, I think that ship has sailed now. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
we're not going to see it. But it would have been. The thing is, with having an original soundtrack as well, and John McNeely did absolutely amazing work on that. And so Mark reviewed it for Jedi News, and I actually reviewed it for Fabio Fiore and the guys over at Tatooine Times. They asked me to go on loan for a couple of hours and do that for them, which I was more than happy to do. But yeah, actually sitting down and actually really concentrating on that, and you can see how easily it could have been brought together. Animation was already halfway there because we got a video game, storyboards in a way, and an amazing book, and I think it could have been quite easily done.
Yeah, I think if the technology had been at the point where it was in 2005 for Clone Wars, and I think if Lucas hadn't been busy with special editions and obviously the prequels, and having obviously just finished, I think I'm right in saying at that point, the Young Indiana Jones series, it would have been almost seemed like the right combination of things to bring that, to re-bring Star Wars back into television.
Well, past Jedi, we'd only ever had animated series.
Yeah.
Once Jedi had gone, we'd had droids and Ewoks. So we'd only ever had animated from that point. So animation probably would have been the next step. But obviously, video gaming changed early 90s. Right, I was going to say late 80s, but really it was the early 90s when it really changed because you'd actually got things, the advent of the personal computer with the old IBM AT. So I think that was the game change. I think that's why I think the video game was the animation, if you see what I mean.
Yes, yeah.
Speaking of sort of animation and how things look, obviously you mentioned, Drew Struzan came in to do the cover of the book, which, the cover of the book is absolutely beautiful. I think obviously, Drew Struzan did the original trilogy posters. He did the prequel trilogy posters. And I think getting him in to do this just allows us to blend in to the Star Wars story and the Star Wars sort of visual presence that we know and love.
Yeah, I mean, obviously he did most of the covers for a lot of the original expanded universe. I mean, like I said, back then you were getting one, I want to say it was, Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, but in the early 90s it was literally one book a year, wasn't it?
Yep, it was. May 91 was the very first Timothy Zahn Thrawn novel, Heir to the Empire. Then the following year, it was the May 92, but the following year it was actually April. So we actually wait 11 months for the third and final book of that trilogy.
Yeah,
but yeah, we were lucky if it was 2 a year.
Yeah, and so it made it so the fact that the covers were done by Drew Struzan and everything, they were unlike now, where if you want to read a bit more Star Wars, there's a book, every couple of months. It was an event. Everyone got, because there wasn't the range. Everyone was reading the exact same book at the exact same time, and it made it was such a bigger impact on us as fans because it was so little, and in some ways, you kind of want to. I want to say I kind of miss those times because it was great to be talking about this, these books for so long before then moving on, to the next one. You could discuss for hours on end and not have any idea about any of the answers for a whole of the year. It was a very different time.
I think one thing with Shadows, because it was one book, whereas the Throne was a trilogy.
Yeah.
The Throne books from Zahn, so that made it different because it was one of the first standalone books as such. But obviously, in those periods between those books as well, you could reread them.
Yeah.
So it wasn't you just read Shadows of the Empire, you put it down, and you probably never go back to it. You'd pick up the next book, and that's one of the problems. Well, I wouldn't say one of the problems with the High Republic. We had 5 releases within 2 months of major novels, whether it be for junior readers or whichever. But they're all part of the same storyline, followed by comics as well. They're all fit in from Star Wars or the High Republic Adventures. It's known from the IDW and the High Republic for Marvel. Back then, you could actually pick up Shadows of the Empire and probably reread it 5 times before you actually picked up the next book, which was following 8-9 months later. So I think that also helped you becoming more involved with the story because you'd read it that many times, you knew it off by heart. You could probably recite certain parts of the book without even blinking. I probably know that you can, Mark.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what I mean. So I think because we've read it that many times, because you had that much time between the books. Now it's like a conveyor belt.
Yeah.
Next one, put it down. Next one, put it down. Next one, put it down. And that's where it's all changed. And in some ways, it's the old adage of what they said about Disney: too much, too soon. As the movies were too close together, and sort of like we were force fed too much Star Wars in such a short space of time after Disney took over. Whether that's my opinion or somebody else's, and say that that's for debate. But it seems like sort of we get a lot of more information now than we ever did, and it's just become more prolific.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, the difference with Shadows as well is where you had Heir to the Empire coming out and the Dark Empire comics, which were mentioned. The Dark Empire comics, I think I'm right in saying, get mentioned in Heir to the Empire. You read the Shadows of the Empire novel, but then as the months are progressing, you're picking up these comics that are being again released at a steadier pace than they are now, that are making you completely rethink about how the book has portrayed things and seeing things from a different angle. You've then got the game coming in again, showing it from a different angle. So where you've got this year of a gap between books, you've got a year with things enhancing that original book as you're going through it, which was just, I don't think we've really had anything quite like it since.
Yeah, I think actually, I think you made a brilliant point there. So, because I struggle a lot with new canon, but I think if you see Shadows of Empires out and you've got time to read it a few times that year, it's almost like watching the movie over and over again. So it will become familiar to you. So you know it in and out, and then when you play a game or when you read a tie-in comic, it's sort of fresh in your mind. Where I think right now, sort of, because I do read new canon, I'd probably say up until 2.5 years ago I was up to date, but right now I'm halfway through a Throne trilogy, I'm halfway through a Alphabet Squadron trilogy, and I'm halfway through a High Republic books that are out at the minute. So I'm trying to keep up, but I'm just all over the place, and I'm struggling to keep up. And it's I love having Star Wars all over the place and new Star Wars coming out, but I maybe if I quit my job and got rid of my relationship, I definitely have time to do it all. But it's just a case of there's too much Star Wars at the minute, which I suppose is a good problem to have.
Yeah, I feel your pain with that because I feel the same, and I think, but to me, that's all the problem as well. Because I imagine most people are in the same boat, but we're all reading slightly different things. I've read all the High Republic things, but I haven't necessarily read the Alphabet Squadron books, and so that buzz that should be there for a single release isn't there because people are focusing on different different books that are being released, and I think it seems a shame because it's that buzz that I think makes it so awesome to be a fan. When The Mandalorian comes out, we're all watching The Mandalorian because it's the only bit of Star Wars TV we've got, so we're all talking about it. And back in the 90s when the books and the comics were being released, because there were so few, it was that sort of event that you were talking about it with, your friends and other fans.
Yeah, so I completely agree there. I'm not trying to say stop producing Star Wars books, because the team that they've got with Cavan Scott and Charles Soule
It's always incredible.
and Justina and Claudia and DJ. If I've missed anybody there, please don't shout at me. Yeah, what they're doing and what they're producing alongside the comics is absolutely phenomenal. But so War of the Bounty Hunters is 40 issues between the 1st of May and the end of October. When you
Wow.
start counting, that's full. Just short of 40 issues. I think it's like 38 issues. I did mention it in our WhatsApp chat the other day, didn't I?
Yeah.
And so that is a phenomenal amount of comic books coming out. And that's just to explain one storyline, which a 400-page Shadows of the Empire did.
Yeah. Obviously, sort of finishing up talking about the novel by Steve Perry, what was sort of each of yours favourite part of the novel?
The Shizor Leia relationship part, just the way that is written, is you just get to understand Leia more, and you understand the hurt that Shizor goes through, because all of a sudden he's been rebuffed. Bit of a spoiler alert there, but yeah. So yeah, for me that just stands out phenomenally.
So for me, it would be Shizor and Vader. It was really the first time where we get to see that Vader isn't just the Emperor's apprentice, that there is a constant battle going on with every single person who's below the Emperor, trying to impress him, trying to show him that, praise should be heaped on them. And it was the first real time when Vader was the one in question, trying to gather the Emperor's approval and having to deal with other people. Somebody who was Vader's equal, but very, very different sort of way. And I think that was just wonderful to see.
And last thing about the book, I've read that there was a prequel novel planned to be written by Charles Grant, but this was cancelled simply due to licensing issues.
Never heard that one. To be fair,
Charles Grant wrote X-Files Whirlwind, didn't he? I think, off the top of my head.
That's one I wouldn't know that one. So, but I've never heard that. But
no.
I've just finished reading a novel that should never have come out, In the Heart of the Jedi by Kenneth Flint.
Oh.
Which I got to admit, that's another discussion for another day on a totally separate time, I think, because there's that much to get into with that book. But that was an unproduced novel of the same era. But I've never heard of that one, to be fair, Pete.
Yeah, so I you just come across it when I was doing a bit of research. So apparently, Charles Grant was going to write a prequel novel for Shadows of the Empire, and it simply didn't happen because Lucasfilm licensing moved from Bantam Books to Del Rey Books.
Oh, now you've said
okay.
that's ringing a little bell. Yeah, I think it was such a smidgen, because again, I think the internet was only just really starting to get to the kind of volume where it is now. But I remember hearing rumblings about something like that. I hadn't realised it was Charles Grant. And I remember being disappointed, but obviously back then it was just like, okay, let's move on kind of thing. Although I think a prequel would have been very interesting indeed, particularly with Shizor, because Shizor, although the impact I think Shizor and particularly Black Sun have on Star Wars, even in canon, Shizor very rarely gets brought into the books and comics, except for the Bounty Hunters trilogy.
Yeah.
Which, for someone who was such a popular character, who, and is so important within the kind of hierarchy of the Empire, seems absolutely shocking.
Yeah, I think the one character we need to mention really is Guri as well, because she was like a Blade Runner-esque replicant.
Yeah. And obviously that's where Shadows of the Empire Evolution focuses on.
Again, written by Steve Perry, and I do know from talking to Steve that his wish was to carry on Dash Rendar's story and Guri's story beyond that as well. if he'd have been allowed to. So there was plenty of mileage there and plenty of clamour from Steve to carry on writing Shadows.
Yeah, so sort of diving into the comic side of it, obviously the first comic run, the 6-issue comic run, was written by John Wagner, and Steve Perry was a story consultant on that. And that's what we've already mentioned, where it was the sort of storyline following Boba Fett and the bounty hunters from Empire Strikes Back, as well as new characters, and the hiring of the sort of the gang of bikers.
Jix and co. Yeah.
Do you remember sort of reading the comics and when you first saw the comics out there?
Yes. It was the first time my dad ever took me to Nostalgia Comics in Birmingham. And there's 2 layers, and I remember going up to their first floor and finding a vintage Darth Vader figure, complete, for $9.99. Those were the days. And I remember grabbing it ready to purchase, and I just went past. It was issue 2, I think, at Shadows of the Empire, and there was Boba Fett mid kind of stride, looking around as there's a load of guns pointing at him, and thinking, "Oh my goodness me, what is this?" And 5 minutes later, I came out with the comic. Not really. I hadn't really kind of connected that it was related to the game I was playing. How wonderful the mind of a 10-year-old is, I guess. But going through this comic, going, what is this? This is incredible. The artwork, the whole, up till then I'd been reading the Beano and the Dandy. So to go from that to this was like, what have I got in my hands?
Yeah, so I came late to the comics, actually. My main connection through the comics, because to be fair, I was at an age, obviously I was quite a bit older, so really comics weren't in vogue for somebody of my age at the time. I've got back into comics in the last 10 years in a massive way. But at the time, it wasn't quite in vogue for somebody of my age to be reading comics, mid to late 20s. So I think that's where I stumbled a bit. My only connection with the comics really was the comics that were actually put out with the action figures. So whenever you bought a 2-pack of the action figures, so you got IG-88 versus Boba Fett, and you'd also got a Vader versus Shizor. You actually got a mini breakdown comic. Again, from the original artwork by Killian Plunkett and storyline by John Wagner as well. But some of them also, we used to get spin-off ones through the not the Galoob Micro Machines. Which ones was it, Mark, that had the extra comics? It was Galoob, wasn't it? It was the Micro Machines. They all came with like little mini comics with them as well, but they were penned by somebody different as well, and I can't remember that person's name off the top of my head now. I'm looking through my notes, and it wasn't in my notes. It was actually in the article that I wrote regarding all the everything but a movie article that I did at the end of the celebration. So so my comic book experience for them was slightly delayed, but I've really enjoyed revisiting them because obviously it does tell the same story, but from a completely different perspective.
And what's your favourite part about that first 6-issue comic book series?
Any page that's got Boba Fett on it.
See, for me, it was Jinx. I loved Jinx, which is because I remember getting the one-shot Shadow Stalker, which had him in. I love the fact that Vader. I mean, it again seems so obvious now, but him going and finding someone to hire to do his work. Very much actually how he works with Dr. Aphra, in the Darth Vader series by Kieran Gillen. It was again showing a different side to how the Empire and Vader worked, and that whole kind of hierarchy thing. That actually, this the image you have portrayed in the movies is that they're this very utilitarian empire that doesn't like crime, doesn't like smugglers, and actually the whole of Shadows just completely undoes that and goes, actually they do use them, and this is how.
Joking apart with the Boba Fett thing there, I think what I really enjoyed was it actually delved inside the actual world of the bounty hunter. like we're getting the Mandalorian and what we're actually getting in War of the Bounty Hunters now. It actually goes beyond that serene. We've seen this man of mystery in this beat up armor with the rocket pack and all that sort of thing, but it actually takes you beyond that. It actually takes you into his world a bit, and I think we'd never really seen that before. I think we got that afterwards through John Wagner with the Boba Fett twin engines. What's it? Engines of Destruction, is it?
Yeah.
And those types of titles. But we'd never really stepped inside that world before, and I think that was what captivated me about it. Although, again, that was a few years after they originally came out.
I've just been doing a bit of reading, so there was, micro comics were released with the Micro Machine toys.
That's right. Yeah,
and with
there was three. There was three micro comics and 2 comic packs as well. As in the 2 packs.
Ertl model kits. I don't know. I'm unfamiliar
Yes.
with what that is.
Yeah, the Ertl model kits basically the Virago, Emperor, and Prince Shizor, and basically there were again little mini comics within those. Again, they're available on eBay quite prominently at the moment. All the Ertl stuff, and some of them are still sealed, and they don't go for obnoxiously bad prices, and they are lovely kits as well when made up. So if anybody's out there who fancies a weekend's old-fashioned model making with a bit of painting and that, they're well worth picking up as well.
And then there was a pop-up comic, entitled Battle of the Bounty Hunters, which obviously sounds very similar to War of the Bounty Hunters. Star Wars is poetry, as to say, it rhymes. And then also a one-shot comic called The Jabba Tape.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, so the thing is as well, what also gets mixed in with this as well is if you buy the actual new version of the Shadows of the Empire Omnibus, which was on Comixology for 67p the other day. Was it 67p, Mark, or was it 79p?
79.
79p, which was a terrible price to pay for 6 copies or 6 issues of Shadows of the Empire, 5 issues of Evolution, and 6 issues of Mara Jade, Hand of the Emperor. And basically, they were all meant to tie in as well. So even the Mara Jade series was meant to tie in with Shadows of the Empire in some way as well.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, like I said, you had Shadow Stalkers for Jinx and the Jabba Tapes. I think the Jabba Tapes was set after Return of the Jedi and kind of what happened to the Swoop Gang. But it's strange because for something that had such an effect on so many fans, that there's so few, I think, offshoots from Shadows. Like, it was one of those things I think people were scared to touch almost because the main story had such an impact. And how do you, because for us, obviously, it filled in the gap between Empire and Jedi. It's how do you replicate that with these characters going forward?
Yeah, I suppose, you've got sort of the beginning of the story in Empire Strikes Back. This group of stories in different mediums, Shadows of the Empire, fills in the next part of the story, and then we're into Return of the Jedi, really, which at the time, I suppose, is the end of the Star Wars story for all intents and purposes. So I can definitely see why it would be challenging to sort of, where do we go from here? That sequel comic series, the Shadows of the Empire Evolution, when did that come out? Was that like 90s as well?
Yeah, that was later. It was actually set after Return of the Jedi. So it's after the collapse of the Empire. But obviously, Guri comes into comes into conflict with some Imperial forces. But it's a proper redemption story of Guri's story, because obviously she's become the bodyguard and linchpin of Black Sun. Basically, she's become the enforcer in some way for Shizor. But it's about her redemption, how she wants to go and get her memory wiped and forget everything that's going on, all the bad deeds that she's done. But people are after her because she knows all the Black Sun's secrets, and it's where also as well, Feline, one of the Fellini's back in it as well, and it's Shizor's niece, I think it is, if I remember rightly.
Yeah.
And she's trying to take over Black Sun, but she's trying to do it in disguise. She's not actually showing her true identity, and she's after Guri, the Empire after Guri. And then obviously she sort of comes across Luke Skywalker and Han Solo and gang, and and it all kicks off from there. So yeah, it's a great story as well.
Yeah, because
I think it was about 90. Oh,
I think it was
don't
2000,
quote me.
wasn't it?
It could have been it could have been a lot later than that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was something they kind of left buried, and then. But although, if I'm remembering my years right, I'm sure the Bantam Del Rey changeover happened in 2001, which might explain why they were thinking of doing
Yeah.
the prequel book with Charles Grant, and then
1998.
was it really that late?
Yeah.
Early, sorry.
But the trade paperback didn't come out until 2000.
Oh, that makes
So
sense.
that might be where you get your dates from. And then
Yeah.
then the omnibus was 2010.
Yeah.
The power of Google.
So we've got this novel, we've got this game, we've got this comic book series, and they're all telling this sort of overarching story of what's happening in Star Wars between episodes 5 and episode 6, from different points of view. So we're getting different pieces of the story in these different mediums, and then along comes a soundtrack that Lucasfilm commissioned. So reading up on this, it looks like this isn't the soundtrack to the game. This is a soundtrack they had made up to go along with the story. Is that correct?
Yeah, parts of it feature within the game, but it was done as a far more like overarching thing for the entire story, as opposed to being specifically made for the game. Although as soon as I started listening to it, I was like, "Oh, that bit's in here," and you can hear bits of it in the audio book. So they used it like as an overarching thing for the other mediums to be able to dip in and out of.
Yeah, I think if you've got the vinyl version, there's some real wonderful notes written by Joel McNeely on there about the story and how it meant to dovetail into those stories. And I hadn't got the vinyl copy, and so Fabio from Tatooine Times sent them over to me so I could do the review for him. And it was really interesting reading those because it actually tells you what parts of the book that they were actually based upon, because the game hadn't happened by then. It's like the Greg and Tim Hildebrandt Tops cards. They were done before the game was complete and ready to go. And that's why some of that art was actually used in the stills and what have you for the game and the sequencing and those types of things. So what you've got actually the book was the formative thing that everything spawned from as such, and everything came just those few steps later. But the soundtrack does relate very heavily into the book itself and the events of the book.
Do you have a favorite track on the album?
Shizor's theme.
See, I would be. I'm trying to remember the track name now. Night at Imperial City, I think it is.
Track 3, Imperial City.
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
I'm thinking later on. It's
Night Skies.
Yes, sorry, that's the one.
Yep.
Yeah, because you've got Shizor's theme intertwined with a slower tempo Vader theme that gets interwoven. It's kind of taking what we know, changing it slightly, and intertwining it with the new. And you can, particularly with Vader's theme, you really feel the emotional turmoil that's going through Vader at the time, and I think that really comes across in the music.
Yeah, and I find that the most interesting. That, we've got this turmoil going on with inside Darth Vader that we haven't seen before, and then it's going to directly affect the ending of Return of the Jedi, where we see the same thing happening again. So, I think the fact they've used it to sort of to bring more of Anakin out in the character of Darth Vader, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
definitely make me excited to sort of check out these stories now.
Yeah, I mean, particularly obviously, as we've said earlier, we didn't really know the prequels were coming out. So for us, this was kind of one of our first glimpses of how, like you say, the Anakin side coming out, which to us is nothing more than, Obi-Wan's recollections rather than Anakin directly. And no other books had been, like I said, apart from Splinter of the Mind's Eye, this was the first book that really had Vader as a character to be explored in light of the fact that he's told Luke who he is.
Did you sort of pick this album up sort of during the same time of reading the book and playing the game for the first time, or was it like years later you found the album?
Unfortunately, the internet wasn't what it was, and HMV, for some strange reason, wouldn't stock Shadows of the Empire. And I came across it, I think, roughly it was about 2005 on eBay, and picked it up later, put it in, and the memories came flooding back of the game, of the audiobook, and it was just like, wow. There are bits that are very human. I want to say, like the themes for within like Shizor, and the dances are very based on Earth themes, which of course back then, when you're relying your listener doesn't necessarily have the visuals, you're needing to create an impression using themes and ideas that people already know to help shape those views. But obviously, you've then also got the choir in quite a large part of it, which, having then coming from already seeing the prequels with stuff like Duel of the Fates, you're thinking, McNeely was quite ahead of his time in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, especially with the choral additions. I think that was it was groundbreaking, because we'd never had choral additions to any Star Wars classical music. The other thing as well is if you listen to a couple of the tracks, you can actually hear inflections from sort of when you listen to the soundtrack for The Force Awakens around Rey. I think it's the second or third track. I remember highlighting it because it was at a point where you could just hear those sort of like, it was just real small inflections, and it seems as though somewhere along the line it just felt natural. It felt like it was John Williams, although you knew it wasn't.
Yeah, and because McNeely does a very, very good job of bringing in the established kind of sound with Williams, and every so often intertwines it with the new stuff, just to remind you that actually what you're listening to is Star Wars, before pushing on with his own ideas. And yet there's somehow he's able to go, actually, if John Williams was doing this, how would it sound?
Yeah,
And hence why you hear the similarities then between, in things from the prequels, things from the sequels. And it's amazing to think that somebody was brave enough, and Lucasfilm was brave enough, to have somebody other than Williams do a soundtrack like this, and it actually comes over very, very well, even after all these years.
I think if you also look at McNeely's pedigree
Yeah.
and his ability, I think you can see that so he'd done Indiana Jones the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles for Lucasfilm in the build up to this, so he was already known to the team as such. So he'd already got stock in at Lucasfilm quite well. So I think he was probably a natural choice. It could have been John Williams, might not have been available. He could have been scoring something else, because obviously Williams hasn't just done Star Wars. There are quite a few out there that he has done. Well, quite a few. There's
A few, yeah.
yeah, probably the most prolific composer of history, let alone my lifetime. Probably the most, more prolific than any composer, like Handel, Bach, anybody like that. Probably somebody's going to shoot me now and start sending me some stick over social media for that one. But so his wealth of works are unbelievable. But also as well, what I also felt was a couple of the tracks also as well have Indiana Jones tones to them. When you actually really listen to it, and if you try and darken the room and turn the music up a bit, and try and sit there with your eyes closed and try and immerse yourself into it, I found that there were some traits of Indiana Jones in there as well, which I think could come from working on the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles.
Yeah, because I think obviously Joel McNeely and Robert Townsend, the producer, who selected Joel McNeely to compose it, obviously they both worked on that for Lucasfilm, hadn't they?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And obviously great to see them using, I think it was recorded in Glasgow with the Royal Scottish National Orchestra.
Oh, you know what? They bring something. I mean, I put this in my review. They bring something to the Star Wars theme that adds something to the original from the original films, and seems to be very much lacking in the prequels. when they did the main theme. There's just an extra level of detail that's just wonderful to hear. And I'm kind of like, why on earth weren't these? I mean, obviously I know it would be a different team, but why weren't these guys doing the sequel trilogy?
And the thing is, as well, what you got to remember is that was recorded in 2 days and
Yeah.
put to bed. You know what I mean? And to record an 11 or 10 track album, okay, some of the music is well known, but to actually put that down, I think they did an absolutely amazing job.
Definitely, especially some of the tracks are, 7 minutes, 8 minutes, 10 minutes long.
Yeah.
So some of these are big pieces of music.
Definitely.
I did see it in HMV last week when I was having a browse through. So anybody wanting to buy the soundtrack, get yourself the HMV to the CD section.
Well, they've improved it in the last 25 years then.
25 years later.
Yeah.
It's not on my local HMV, but yeah, it is readily available now. eBay is a source for it, but like anything, you hear that it's like anniversaries come along and things like that, and stock seems to go up.
And one of you's mentioned before about listening to it on vinyl, is that correct?
Unfortunately, no. I had some of the vinyl notes sent to me.
Right.
So on the vinyl slipcover, for those who still have vinyl, unfortunately, I've got no way of playing it now. But there were some extra notes put out for the anniversary edition. Is it Sabrassi Verande, who were the label that put it out, and they put out a special gatefold type cover with a load of notes in there from Joel McNeely, and some very, very nice writing in there. And obviously, if you haven't read the book, it actually marries the action with the music, so you actually can understand the music without actually having read the book. So that's quite a nice angle on it as well.
Yeah, I will be looking for the vinyl because I imagine it sounds wonderful on vinyl.
Very much so.
I take it hasn't been reproduced, so you're looking for like the originals, essentially.
No, if I went for it, I'd be going for the new version, because apparently it's the weight of the vinyl as well. Because obviously the older ones would have been in a different weight of vinyl.
Yeah,
there's some technicality. Yeah, there's some technicalities to vinyl now that I never knew existed when I used to go and get the 12-inch long players and play them on 33 1/3 when I got home.
In the liner notes that you mentioned there, with the new version, is there a Ben Burt, obviously legendary sound designer for Star Wars? Is there a poem he wrote about the ancient battle of Coruscant?
It's always said, and I think it's quite correct, that Ben Burt wrote some of the lyrics or some of the words sung by the choral, or the chorus, whichever you want to put it, on the actual tracks. So some of what they're chanting, whatever you're singing, whatever you want to say, that's actually written by Ben Burt, apparently.
I think that sums up the album there. Before we sort of do just a recap of Shadows of the Empire, one of my favorite things about Star Wars is collecting merchandise, and in particular toys and action figures. And obviously there was a toy line made for Shadows of the Empire. When did you guys was there any particularly favourite characters you saw on shelves? Were these readily available, or were they sort of hard to get at the time?
Oh, they were everywhere.
Yeah.
It felt like they were everywhere. And even going into the 2000s, at least the purple figures, backed figures, the 3 3/4, always seemed to be at the Entertainer years later. But for me, it was the micro machines that really stood out. They seemed to be the more difficult ones to get hold of, and I absolutely loved them. That they were fantastic. It was great seeing kind of new Star Wars of things that you just didn't know, and having these models of them, and being able to look at the detail for something that obviously we've never really seen. This is just coming from the novel, from the the game and everything. To have them there in your hand, it felt extra special.
Power of the Force 2 was released in 1995, or the re-advent of 3.75 or 3 3/4 inch toys would come back out. So obviously this was they were just revisits or remolds or just recast of basically new versions of old figures. So we got Luke Tatooine, we got Ben Kenobi, we got Darth Vader, we got all the staples. But this was the first time that we'd actually stepped outside of that box sort of thing, and then we got Princess Leia in Boost Disguise, which was a known figure and quite famous still, and still loved for its original release from the 80s. But then you got Chewbacca in a disguise, you got Luke Skywalker in a disguise, and the thing is that one of the most sought after toys from the original Power of the Force lines was Luke Skywalker as a stormtrooper. This time we got him as an Imperial Guard in this lovely red uniform with a Force staff and all these sort of things. Then you got Dash Rendar, completely new character. Prince Shizor, new character. Then you got the comic 2-packs, which are all new, and there was so much going on. And then you got Boba Fett Slave One, which was like iconic. Yes, it's back with the Han in Carbonite, but then you got Dash Rendar's Outrider as well, and the swoop bike. So there was just so much coming out. There's only about 10 items in that list, but all of it was fresh. It was new.
Yeah.
And we hadn't had that before. So it's like now we're getting these retro figures, and where we've got we've now got Tarkin, we've now got the Mandalorian ones. So we're actually getting figures that we may not have ever seen before. And that's how it was then. We were getting classic figures, a bit muscle bound, to say the least, but we were getting new figures, and it was something different. And that was a massive game changer to the collectors.
Yeah, I think even I've never owned the Luke Skywalker in Imperial God disguise, but like I search for it all the time on eBay, and sometimes I go to buy it, sometimes I don't. Mainly because I'm worried in case it's a bootleg or not, because I'm not the best sort of spotting that type of thing. But yeah, that Luke Skywalker.
I can give you advice on the bootlegs on that one, so you don't worry about that too much. shout me on that one.
Well, I will love that, but my fiance will not. But
yeah, I have got a full set of them, boxed, mint, tri-logos. Still got them locked away, and I even pulled the head off one of my Luke Skywalkers, because I bought a spare, and I did the old boil and pop method, and I took the head off a Lando Calrissian in disguise as his skiff disguise. So I actually popped the head out of that and put it in. So I'd actually got Lando dressed as an Imperial Guard as well, because he disguises himself in the book in the same. So I'd actually got the pair of them sat on my shelf, both stood next to each other in their disguises.
Oh, that's fantastic! You'll have to send us a picture of the display.
Yeah, I will do. I have got one somewhere. If not, I'm gonna have to try and get it out of the loft, because it's tucked away somewhere in the depths of the boxes up there.
How did we come to 2012 and we have the acquisition of Lucasfilm by the Walt Disney Company, and they pretty much say everything before this time point is going to become legends, and everything going forward will be canon. Did that announcement affect the way you look at Shadows of the Empire?
Ooh, it did initially. I think it did, because it was like, how can you scrap all these good stories and just put them into Legends? And it bugged me, because obviously the time invested and everything. But as I've gone forward, maybe not being too happy with some of the decisions made by Disney, in terms of publishing and whatnot. And now I'm like, actually, no, it doesn't, because that was the Star Wars that I grew up with. That will always be my sort of Star Wars. And as Captain Scott said, if it's a good book, it's a good book. And I enjoy, the new Star Wars. I mean, the High Republic series has absolutely blown me away. But for me, there's something so special about those early books and, Shadows, that no one can take that away from me.
The 2015 decision did affect my relationship with Star Wars to start with, because I had invested at that point in time nearly over 20 years in books reading. So so from buying that very first book in 1991, and I have up until that point, I think I've got every single Legend book in first edition print on my shelves in front of me at the moment. And that's quite a lot of books. And if you've read probably 90% of them, like I have, when you see though that time and effort that you've put into reading those, it hurt my relationship with Star Wars a bit. I will say that. But then a few things came about. The comics started coming out, and a few other things, and all of a sudden I started being trickled along, and it pulled me back in. So while I still regret that there's some absolutely amazing stories there, I still think that it's not a bad thing in some ways, and it's not a great thing in others. Jury's still out on some parts, but the Legends have got to be looked at as books worthy of reading. And I think with the release coming next month of the Essential Legends collection, is it, or whichever it is, something like that, isn't it? Or Legends Essentials or something next month from Del Rey, where Heir of the Empire is one of those. We're going to see more of these Legends books brought back to the forefront, and I think there's too many on too many shelves that are being discarded now that are absolutely wonderful reads. There's some poor books in there, but there are some books that are just like mind-blowingly good.
Yeah.
And are worth anybody visiting at any time. Shadows being one of them, Heir to the Empire being another, and the whole Thrawn trilogy. There's some absolute gems in there. There are some books that are like treacle, that are hard to walk through. But then you've got the new Jedi Order series, which is like 24 books and was a publishing sequence over 4 or 5 years, which is like, on a very similar scale to the High Republic. And it was different because we weren't seeing the Empire fighting the rebels or the New Republic fighting an Imperial remnant. We got out of galaxy aliens coming in to try and take over the galaxy. And we've got a more dynamic and probably adult way of looking at it, because it was more violent and what have you, and it had actually grown with the fans, so it had matured with us, and we were then getting more, I don't say adult content, but a bit more grown-up content than what Star Wars is actually meant to be, because Star Wars is still and primarily is meant to be for kids, but we got this more adult spin on the galaxy.
Yeah, and I think with the announcement that things from like pre-2012 weren't canon, doesn't mean that they can't come back into canon. So I think obviously Shadows of the Empire storyline shows us how Leia obtains the armor of Boushh, the bounty hunter, who's associated with Black Sun. And in that storyline, it's to get through Imperial customs on Coruscant. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
I think in the Forces of Destiny episode, Bounty Hunted, Leia and Maz Kanata take Boushh's armor directly from him himself on Old Man Tel. Is that correct?
I think so. Yeah. So to be fair, I'm not fully up to speed with those, so that's one I haven't caught up with. But I will tell you that it's probably going to change again, because War of the Bounty Hunters there's a one shot, which is about Boushh. So there's every chance that one shot will change that story yet again.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, this is the thing, isn't it? I mean, you say about with obviously Shadows being made Legends. We're kind of getting used to the fact. You look at Clone Wars when it decanonized the Karen Traviss books, which I thought were absolutely excellent. But now we've got it again coming with the Bad Batch and Kanan's backstory. I think as fans, I think we're kind of getting used to the fact now that canon's, even now where it's supposed to be linear, is going a little all over the place, and to just enjoy what we enjoy.
Yeah, I think so. When they first announced the new canon, I really bought into it and loved how everything was tying in.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're now 6 years later. I think it's almost an impossible task to have so many different storylines and mediums tying together. So after watching the Bad Batch episode, where I love the Kanan comics, Volume 1 and Volume 2, obviously it's slightly different in that story. So I just put it down to like the unreliable narrator. Like each story you read is from a certain point of view, so to speak.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
Pardon the pun.
yeah. One of my favourite bands, Extreme, they had an album entitled Three Sides. It's three sides to every story, and basically it was called Yours, Mine, and the Truth. So that's where you can look at from that angle.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously we did see. Am I right in thinking that Prince Izor is a Falleen? Is that right?
Yes.
Feline, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So we have the Falling Black Sun obviously made canon in the Clone Wars.
Yeah.
And obviously part of Darth Maul's Shadow Collective.
Yeah.
In that story, and we do see a modified Outrider in Star Wars Rebels.
Yeah, and we do actually see the Outrider in the special edition as well.
Yeah.
Where do we see it in the special edition?
So it takes off from Mos Eisley at the end of the celebrations. At the end, is it as Luke and Ben are coming into Mos Eisley in A New Hope?
Yeah.
Yeah, it takes off from one of the land the docking bays. So as you got the cinematic scene that was added, where you see the land speeder going down the street, you actually see it take off from right to left and go across the screen and fly off, and that's actually meant to be the Outrider.
I'll have to keep an eye out for that next time I watch it. Apparently, as well, there was a tie-in book for Solo Star Wars story, Tales from Vandor, and apparently Dash Rendar is mentioned in that book.
Oh, yes, he would be. Yes, he was.
It's not. In fact, it's one that I haven't read.
No, that's the one I reviewed, I think, Steve. Yeah, he's. Yeah, and it's nice because it's obviously how important is he to modern canon, who knows, but having those little name drops it's nice little touches for us old fans who remember. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think it harkens back these sort of new stories, and if you're reading it from a first time, you'll just love the story. But then if you're reading it and you've invested time and money in the past, and they're sprinkling a little bit of that in it, it almost makes it worth it. I find when you find those hidden gems.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, completely agree with that. As I say, it's just nice to actually have those little nods, and I think that's one thing where Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau have done so well with The Mandalorian. We have those little nods to all those games and all those different bits through the canon that no longer is and is now Legends. It's just like little things, and you just see it on screen. You go, "Yep," and you see those little nods, and that does make it a lot easier to stomach in a way, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, definitely. So to tie us up, sort of what's some of your favorite things and favorite memories, sort of Shadows of the Empire?
Well, for me, obviously, it's that game level, and obviously having it wasn't laptops in everybody's room. We had a family computer that was at the bottom of our stairs, and it was me, my brother who would have been 7 at the time, and my dad all crowding round this tiny. I mean, for us it was big, but now I look back, think, goodness me, tiny computer screen. And my dad's in control, and you can just hear muttering from his his mouth, one more pass, as if he is Wedge Antilles. And where part of me thinks computer gaming now is very solitary with people over the internet. Back then it really brought us together, and all of us marveling at being able to do this this amazing thing that we've watched time and time again in the films, and been able to share that kind of joy and excitement around this small computer screen.
Yeah, I think mine's playing the game as well. I was 24, coming 25 at the time. My brother-in-law was 10 years my junior. So, so he's 14, 15. And obviously we got the house, and basically he used to come over 2 or 3 nights a week and spend time with us, which was fantastic. Me and my brother-in-law become quite close, Mark. And we used to play Life or Level. on Shadows until we completed it, and then we did the same with GoldenEye. So it was having that gaming experience with my brother-in-law, and again sharing that excitement. He'd read the book, I'd read the book. I'm the one to be blamed because he's a fan of Star Wars now. But it was just those things, and those are my lasting memories of camped in front of an N64, in front of a 21-inch TV, and just slaving away over those levels, but enjoying every single second of the frustration. I think that will go. That's difficult to replicate now.
Yeah, and it's difficult as well because if you want to replay the game, you're going to have to go and find an N64 that works and a telly that works, and the controllers that works. It's sort of all analog technology now, isn't it?
Yeah, I've got an angle on that. I've got one that's sort of like at a good price. The only thing is I need is a copy of Shadows of the Empire. That's how close I'm going, and Mark knows that.
Yeah, we're both close, aren't we? I mean, 'cause when you mentioned, kind of like the frustration, I was just thinking, you know what? The thing I wouldn't be able to replicate now because I'd need a very old TV. Is I remember the sewer level, and back then TVs were not great, particularly for darker levels, because even with like your curtains closed and everything, the light would just bounce off. And I remember that level driving me up the wall because of the light reflecting off the TV and not actually being able to see anything.
Turn up the contrast and the brightness to max just so you can see a crack of something on the screen.
Yeah, exactly. Where obviously, I imagine you wouldn't have that problem now with TVs today, but all the frustration
Yeah.
of that one level of thinking, for goodness sake, and I like things looking dark, but it was just like, for goodness sake, can someone put a light, on in game so I can see what's going on?
Yeah, so that was one of the frustrations. The one thing as well that I found that was really good for me to get my head around everything that went on with Shadows of the Empire and its developments is the book by Mark Vaz. Again, can be picked up dirt cheap on eBay, but there are some expensive copies out there because there's some rarities. Is The Secrets of Shadows of the Empire from Box Tree. If anybody's listening who really wants to go into the depths of what the Hildebrands were doing and what John Knowles was doing and how Perry and Wagner all come involved and what have you, and all the background of Shizor and all these things, that's well worth spending a few quid on. I had never read it properly until I was actually doing my research to do all this work with Jedi News. And I tell you what, I wish I'd have picked it up a long time ago, sooner, because it's an absolutely stunning book.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, I've mentioned about the first time I went to a comic book store was coming out with Shadows with my dad, which was huge. But only 2 years ago I actually picked, because they actually did a young reader's book, Shadows of the Empire by Christopher Golden, and it was the first Star Wars book I'd given to my son Charlie. When we went on holiday, and he read that thing quicker than anything, and I think it kind of shows the impact Shadows had. That was the first one I wanted to give to him to read, and he came out going, "This is really, really cool." And I thought, for someone who at the time was 12, and even he was enjoying it, all these years later, I think says a lot about the story.
Definitely. So, last question from me is, obviously, I've not really experienced the story. What direction do you point me in? Should I pick up a copy of the novel, or should I try and read a comic book first, or what should I do?
For me, novel.
Yeah,
For me, the novel is a starting place. That is the formative point for everything that came afterwards. The game came later, slightly. The comic came slightly later, and the Hildebrands did their work from the novel. So for me, that's the starting point.
Yeah, and I'd agree, because although I came to it from the game first, I think the novel gives such an overarching perspective on everything. The blanks that the comic, if you can get the game, fantastic. But the gaps that they fill in, they are, they're the gaps left by the novel for them rather than anything else.
Well, thank you very much for that. I think I'll try and pick that up. Is Shadows of the Empire one of these books getting the really nice republishing this year?
At the moment, no.
Right, I might just.
But never say never.
I might just pick
And
any copy up then.
that's not because I know something.
I was going to say that sounded like it did, Steve.
No. I wish I did. I wish I had got those contacts. I've got good contacts, but they ain't that good. Yeah, I would love to see it re-released with a new cover and all that sort of thing. I've got to buy that Heir of the Empire and put it alongside my original 1991 first edition. But I will also love to do the same with Shadows. So, not officially, I've not heard anything, but if we do hear anything, believe me, Jedi News will be running it as a story.
Yeah. Unrelated, I've got a Tim Zahn story. So at Celebration Orlando, I was at the Hasbro booth, and sort of I think the first day of Celebration they had a glass case that was empty and it was like being unveiled soon. And then like the next day I was there and like it had the Throne figurine, which was the Comic-Con exclusive that year. That came with all the cool extras, the Black Series.
Yep.
And obviously it hadn't been in there the day before. It was in there the next day. So I was walking past, spotted it, and I was like staring at it, like thinking how awesome was that. And obviously, but kept walking, and like I bumped into someone, and I knocked someone over. So I turned around and apologised, and it was Timothy Zahn. It arrived there to look at his figure. So I was like, apologised, and realised who it was, and I was like, oh, right, I was just like the figure captivated us, and it wasn't watching where I was going, and I was like, all right, that's your figure type of thing. And you can tell he was like, you know, he wasn't angry that I'd bumped into him, but you could tell, you could see that I was a bit starstruck at that point, and he was almost on the laugh at us a bit, which I thought was really cool.
That's an awesome story.
Yeah, so we were lucky enough to myself and James to interview him last year for Jedi News. The full interviews on YouTube, so you can watch it there. It was released on the podcast, and for me, that was Timothy Zahn is the reason why I fell back in love with Star Wars back in '91. That book, and if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be doing what I do now. I find what I do is I'm very privileged in what I do for Jedi News gives me back, and I feel very privileged to be able to do that. So I owe Tim Zahn a lot. My wife doesn't like him so much because obviously he's cost me a lot of money. Could be quite rich if I hadn't got all these books and collectibles and what have you. But yeah, Tim Zahn has got a lot to answer for with a lot of us.
Yeah, definitely. I think one last memory is at Celebration Chicago. So my cousin Alan is who got me into Star Wars. So like he showed me it on VHS when I was about 4 or 5. VHS or Betamax or whatever it would have been. So I'm like a tweener. So I'm like in between the original trilogy and prequel trilogy. I'm getting into Star Wars in about 1994, 1993 maybe.
Right.
Very similar to me, yeah.
And then so obviously my cousin's older than me. I think he was born the same year Star Wars came out. So I think he experienced Return of the Jedi like in theaters as a fan. And obviously went through the dark times, and then Hit the Empire comes out, and then he's hooked again. So we were at the so Daniel Berry over at the Forcecast, who I'm very lucky to call a friend. We were visiting him at the Forcecast booth, and Tim Zahn was giving an interview with Ryan Donahoe at the time, and me and Alan were sitting like in the booth talking to Daniel, and obviously sort of Alan's like, my cousin's like losing his mind. He's quite a shy guy, and I was like, once his interview's finished, like ask him, like go and speak to him, ask him for a photo. I'll take the snap. I was like, I won't ask for one because I've met him before in Orlando, and then it means that you'll get your picture, then you can shoot off before like crowds of people come down here. And Alan was like, "Do you think so?" I went, "Yeah, we'll do it." And like I said, Alan managed to meet his sort of hero and get a nice picture with him, have a nice moment, and thank him. So like that was another moment. It was like great to see my cousin who really appreciates Tim Zahn, like probably the same as you guys do. Like have that moment with him was beautiful.
Yeah, to say thank you to his face over a live video feed, not in person, was the only disappointing part about it. But hey, that can happen yet. There's still plenty of celebrations left in me yet. It's just I've never been able to get to one stateside yet. but I'm hoping that's going to change next year. But we'll see. We'll see how the land lies for that one.
Definitely.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to meet Timothy Zahn at Celebration 6 because I was over in Orlando on holiday, and literally was my last day of the holiday was the first day of Celebration, and I remember going to the panel with Timothy Zahn, and they were very adamant that he wasn't going to be doing any signings until the next day. And as soon as the panel was over, I rushed to the front and said, "I'm really sorry, Tim, but I'm from England and I'm only here for today. Could you sign my Heir to the Empire book, which I'd brought all the way with me from over here, just in case?" And he was so gracious and said, "Absolutely, of course." And then before I knew it, I was absolutely swarmed by loads of fans, but I got my signature and got to say thank you to him, which was just wonderful.
Definitely, that's a fantastic memory. Thank you very much, guys, for coming on and joining me and sort of giving me all the information, all the education on Shadows of the Empire. It's been a privilege to listen to it, and I'm really excited to pick up the novel now and give it a read.
Great.
Good, thank you for having us. It's been wonderful talking about it in such depth.
Yeah, so it's very different to be actually on the other end of the interview.
And
so thank you for inviting us. I say it's a privilege to do it for you, and hopefully we can return the compliment one time and get you on there, take cover or something like that over at Jedi News.
100%. Just let me know what I need to know, and I'll come on and happy to talk Star Wars with anyone really. So yeah, it'll be a privilege.
Awesome, mate. Awesome.
And I'd love to know what you think of Shadows when you do read it.
Yeah, definitely.
And I will definitely be hitting you up about where to buy the non-bootleg things from.
Yeah, no worries, mate. Well, the thing is, so you never know. I might have some for sale. do your mates rates?
Fantastic. That's my kind of deal.
But not 1996 rates.
I bet. So just for anyone listening, if you go to JediNews.com and just search Shadows of the Empire, you can find all the awesome articles that the team over there have been producing to celebrate the 25th anniversary of Shadows of the Empire. So there's like separate articles on the soundtrack, on the game, on the book, on the comics. So definitely go check that out, and you can get even more information than what we've talked about here. Gents, where can the people find you on social media?
Right. The way to get hold of me is I'm Jedi Master Obi-Wan, and that's the last three letters or numericals are an O, B, and a 1 after the alleged ancient call sign of, or the name of, Obi-Wan being a clone.
And I'm on Twitter at Spooked Hippie, which is SPOOKEDHIPPIE.
Fantastic. So listeners, make sure you follow the guys on social media. Make sure you get over to JediNews.com. Search Shadows of the Empire, and like I said, all those brilliant 25th anniversary articles will come up. It's also awesome for keeping up with the Star Wars news. Again, gents, pleasure having you on. Stay safe out there. Obviously, I know you guys are vaccinated now, so that's good.
Yep.
Yes, and same to you.
Yep. So
double bubble on the vaccine. So yeah, all good to go.
So I've had my first one today, so I'm feeling pretty good actually. To be fair, and I just can't wait to get my second one, and then it makes all the conventions coming up at the back end of the year a lot more doable, which will be fun.
Yeah, Jason's mentioned. Because I know you speak to my cousin Jason, who does a lot for Jedi News as well. We'll talk Telford.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Telford will be big.
Brilliant. Well, thanks very much, guys. May the Force be with you. Listeners, may the Force be with you. And remember, always tell that to Kanja Club. Please follow us on Twitter at BoresStar. That's at BORESSTAR. And on Instagram and Facebook at Star Wars Podcast. You can also reach us on email at starwarspodcast@gmail.com. The Star Wars Show can be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Anchor, and wherever podcasts can be found. Please give us a like, subscribe, and don't forget to leave a 5-star review. May the Force be with you.